everyone, welcome back to another video. If it's your first time here, my name is Michael Shu and welcome. Today we are talking about the cost of flight training. Before we dive into this video, I do want to warn you guys that flight training is very expensive. However, if you put it into perspective, you'll be making a lot more money in the future than what you will be putting into flight training. So think of it as an investment. You can finish all your training in a year to year and a half, flight instruct for 2 years, and then go to the airlines. So you become an airline pilot within 4 years, which is actually a really short amount of time. If you think about it, compared to going to college is 4 years right there. And after college, you're not guaranteed a high paying job. You don't have a whole lot of work experience unless you're finishing college as a doctor, a nurse, programmer, engineer. So right out of college, you're not getting a whole lot of pay. You can compare flight training to the training that it costs to become a doctor. I think to become a doctor, you first need 4 years of undergrad. Then you need 2 to 3 years of medical school. And after that, you need however many years of residency and all this other training then to become a doctor. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure. But I think the cost of medical school is maybe almost double what it takes to become a pilot. So yes, where flight training is very expensive, you don't need a whole lot of time to make that money back. And you'll be making a lot more money in the future, like I said. Be sure to watch the very end of this video, as I'll be telling you some ways that you can save money and some things you can do to keep the cost low of your flight training. And for everyone that's watching this video that's finished training or is currently going through training, let me know in the comments down below how much money it took you to go through each license, whether it's your private, commercial, instrument, multi-engine, CFI. Let me know in the comments down below how much it took you. Before we dive into this video, if you guys aren't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you guys went down, smash the subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It's gonna help me out a ton. Without further ado, let's dive into the video of how much it costs for flight training. It's hard for me to give you guys an exact number of how much flight training is because there are so many factors that can affect the cost of flight training. We're gonna be going through all those factors that could affect flight training, and at the end, I'll be giving you guys a range of how much it costs for flight training. As I said before, there are a lot of factors that can affect flight training. Number one is where you're doing your training at. If you're doing your flight training in a city or a state where cost of living in general is already high, you can probably imagine that your flight training is probably going to be expensive as well. Such as your rental fee for the airplane is probably be more expensive. Your CFI is going to be charged more since the cost of living is higher in that city or state. They need to charge more. The price of gas will probably be more expensive. So you can imagine for me, I did my flight training here in California, San Diego, and it's already expensive to live out here. So flight training was pretty expensive. However, if you do your flight training in a city or a state that's not as expensive to live in, probably flight training won't be as expensive. So some places, on top of my mind, that I'm just naming off cities, I don't know how true this is, but places are like Texas, maybe Arizona, they have good weather there as well. I hear Florida could be a good place, but when you go to these cities, you don't want to go to the most popular, most expensive towns. You want to go to the outside of those hopping cities, places that, like I said, have cheaper cost of living, so your flight training will probably be cheaper as well. So location is a huge factor that will affect the cost of your training. However, another thing to think about when you are choosing a location to do your training, you don't want to just think about the prices, you also do want to think about the weather, which is another huge factor that can change the price and how long your training will be. Maybe Ohio or Wisconsin or Michigan could be great states that are very cheap to do your flight training. However, they don't have the best weather. In the wintertime, they do have storms and snow and ice and all things that can delay your flight training. And when you're going through flight training, you definitely don't want any delays in your flight training. You want to be as consistent as possible, fly as much as possible to get that repetition in so you don't have to go back after a few weeks and relearn stuff you've already learned, because that can also affect the cost of your flight training. But weather is also a huge factor to think about when you are choosing a location to do your flight training. You generally want to do your flight training in places that have good weather, such as California, Arizona, Texas, Florida. These are all popular states where people usually go do their flight training because They do have good weather almost all year round. I know California, where I did my flight training, does have good weather all year round. There is marine layer in the morning and in the evenings, sometimes during the winters, but that is also good for instrument training. And then in the afternoon, all that marine layer burns off and it's good to do maneuvers. So when you are thinking of a location to do your flight training, not only do you want to think about where is a good place that won't cost as much, but also weather, since that can also change the length of time, which will also change the cost of your flight training. The third thing on the list of things that can affect your cost during flight training, and the thing you can probably control the most, is how much you study on your own. If you are going through a lesson and your instructor teaches you everything that day, whether it's maneuvers, whether it's ground school for weather or systems, and you don't study, the next time you come back, your instructor will have to teach you those things all over again. So you can see, when you paid money for one lesson and you didn't study for it, you're paying money to repeat a lesson. So if you don't study on your own, you're just constantly repeating lessons until you get it. And the instructor has no problem taking your money to teach you a lesson he previously taught you. He's first of all making more flight hours, which is good for him, and he's making more money. So if you want to speed up your flight training and keep the costs low, you gotta study on your own. Generally, people say you gotta spend 2 hours on the ground studying for every hour you're up in the air. So whether you are doing a 2-hour flight that day, you gotta be studying 4 hours on the ground. That way you're constantly progressing. That way every lesson you are learning something new and you're not spending money to go back and repeating lessons. That's probably the one biggest factor, and the one factor that you are able to control the most is how much you study on your own, whether it's on the ground or doing maneuvers up in the air. Another factor that can affect your cost of flight training is depending on the type of airplane you are doing your training on. There are some aircrafts that have glass cockpit with G1000 that are very fancy, that are brand new. You can imagine those plane rental fees are gonna cost a lot more. Where if you train on maybe Cessna 152 or Cessna 172 that are all steam gauges, that doesn't have the fanciest equipment, those are going to probably be cheaper. So that can also affect the cost of training depending on what aircraft you do your training on. I personally did all my training on a G1000 on Cessnas and Archers, so of course it was more expensive. However, like I said, if you do your training on steam gauges, something that flies that's not too fancy, that's also going to be cheaper. So something to think about. However, I do think there are value to both, whether you're doing your training on a G1000 glass cockpit or you're doing your training on steam gauges. Those are both valuable. I wouldn't say one is better than another. I would just say whatever fits your budget, do what's best for you. So those are the 4 main things that can affect the cost of flight training. Number 1 is where you're doing your training at. Number 2, the weather. Choose a place that has good weather all year round. Number 3, the thing that you can control the most and will greatly affect the cost of your flight training is how much you study on your own. Number 4 is the type of aircraft you're doing your flight training on. So now let's talk about the actual cost, how much I've seen people actually pay for flight training. Like I said, there are so many factors that can affect the cost of flight training, so it's gonna be a pretty big range. I've seen people that really study hard and try to keep the cost low. They can finish all their flight training in around $60,000 to $70,000. That's on the cheaper end. However, on the more extreme end, a little more expensive, people that don't study, people that think money just grows on trees and they don't have to study. I've seen students spend around $120,000 to $140,000 to $150,000 just for their flight training. So it is a big range from $60,000 to $130,000. That is a big range, and it could cost anywhere in between, depending on those factors like we talked about. I was able to find online the cost breakdown of every licenses on AeroGuard's website. We can take a look. As it says, private pilot license, it costs between $10,000 to $20,000, which is good. You see a range. It's not an exact number, so that's always good. Instrument rating between $10,000 to $15,000. Commercial license between $25,000 to $35,000, and so on and so on. So let's say we're an excellent student. We study every day. We don't have to repeat any lessons, and we're just perfect. If we want to see the least amount of money according to this chart, it's gonna cost $70,000, which is actually really good. We can make that even cheaper if you say, I don't wanna become an MEI. That's gonna become $65,000. And like I said, that's definitely on the cheaper end. However, if you wanna plan for this, and let's say we wanna be conservative, let's say I do have to repeat lessons because I'm not the best student, the weather is not the best, so on and so forth. If we take the most expensive numbers, all your training comes out to $110,000. Instead, you don't want to become an MEI, comes out to $100,000. So that is around the range of how much it costs, according to AeroGuard's website. I agree and concur with that. On the cheaper end, it does cost anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000. However, on the more pricier end, it can go above $100,000. However, in my personal opinion, I think a Part 61 school, a mom and pop flight school where you pay as you go, tends to be cheaper than if you do an accelerated program. Since accelerated program has this whole course, and I think it's intended for them to make a little bit of money. So they're gonna add that cost in. A lot of Part 141 programs, they advertise themselves as accelerated, streamlined. They have all these partners with all these airlines so they can charge a lot more money, such as ATP, American Airlines Cadet Academy, which is what I did, which is not a bad thing, but I'm just saying it could be a little bit more expensive. There are a lot of accelerated programs out there, but in my opinion, those are a little bit more expensive. So if we're strictly talking about costs and you want to save money, maybe a Part 61 will be a little bit cheaper. And the joke is, it's called Part 61 because you're parting away with $61,000, which is, like I said, actually not a bad deal at all if you can finish all your training in $60,000. However, that might not be the fastest route. If you do want the fastest route to become an airline pilot, I would say then go with a Part 141 training program, as they have the whole course outlined, very streamlined. They have trained so many students out there, such as American Airline Cadet Academy program, ATP, or the United Aviates program. These are all fast track accelerated programs, but they might not be the cheapest. So that is another factor you have to think about, whether you want to finish all your flight training as fast as possible or you want it as cheap as possible. There is no right answer, but I would suggest for you to do what is best for you in your financial situation. Whether it's to do something cheap but might take a little bit longer, or something like an accelerated program but might cost $120,000. Another tip that I have to give to all you guys is some flight schools require all the cash up front. I would say don't do that. That's probably not a good idea. I've heard so many stories of people giving their money all up front and then the school goes out of business. And now you're down $100,000. That's a lot of money. So if you can, try not to give all your money up front. That's why Part 61 is good. You can pay as you go. Another tip I have for all you guys is read the contract of flight schools. Some flight schools say they're a fixed cost, but no flight schools are ever a fixed cost. So definitely read the contract. And if a flight school ever quotes you an exact amount of money, something fishy is going on. Because I told you earlier, there are so many factors can affect the cost of flight training. So if ever a flight school quotes you an exact amount, I would say start asking more questions. Start looking at reviews of that flight school. Start asking questions. Oh, if I did have to go over, if weather wasn't the best and I had to extend my flight training, is it still a fixed cost? So that's something to think about. If they ever quote you an exact amount, red flags should start going off and you should be asking more questions. So finally, let me tell you how much I paid for my flight training. I did go through an accelerated program. As some of you guys might know, I went through the American Airlines Cadet Academy program. It was very fast. I finished all my flight training probably in a year and a half. I probably could have finished it sooner, but you know that small thing called COVID and pandemic happened, which extended my flight training a little bit. So for me to finish all my flight training, get all my licenses within a year to a year and a half took me around $120,000. Like I told you, it is on the pricier end, but I was able to get all my flight training done in a short amount of period. I also did fly in San Diego, California, flying fancy airplanes, brand new Archers with G1000. So that's why it was probably a little bit more on the pricier end. So that's gonna be it for this video. For everyone that's currently going through flight training or have already finished flight training, let me know in the comments down below how much it took you to go through your flight training. And if you guys aren't subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you guys went down, smash the subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up. It's gonna help me out a ton. Like I said, it's only one click, and we are one community trying to help each other, support each other, become better pilots. So subscribe and be a part of this awesome aviation pilot community. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.